On this May the 4th, I thought it would be a good way to start the program for all of our Star Wars fans with a quick ruination. And I know many of you are not big fans of the first three, the prequels. Uh, I am. I actually enjoy them on par with the first three that we saw, the middle three. But without giving it too much thought, let's go back to our opening sequence here and just leave this thought with you for a moment. And perhaps this will just redouble your feelings that you don't particularly like the first three movies. Because I think one of the things that's especially troubling to folks like you is that you know that somewhere out there is the American version of Jar Jar Binks, and he's ready to vote for emergency powers for the Empire. And the thing that really disquiets you and keeps you up at night, and if it didn't before, it will now, he may already, or they may already be in the U.S. Senate, and they very well might be a Republican. Go ahead, playa. Sleep on that. May the 4th be with you. Joining us to kick off this week's show from his office, busy campaigning. I'm surprised. I figured he'd be on the dais with the vice president in Richmond because I know he and the vice president have so much in common. He is State Senator Bryce Reeves. Good morning. Good afternoon, Bryce. How are you, sir?
Well, you really are in space right now, thinking I'd be with Joe Biden somewhere. Oh my goodness.
No, no, no. Kamala Harris, not Jill Biden. Or do you think Jill Biden is the vice president?
Well, he was, I guess, at one point, right?
That's right.
I don't know if he ever really took the presidency, did he?
That's a good question. That might that might be right there with where somebody was born and raised. But I know that Vice President Kamala Harris is in Richmond, touting how much small business needs the Biden administration, and so that's where I want to start out with you, Bryce, because as a state senator, and we'll get into the reelection campaign that you're on right now, but you are also a small business owner, and tell us all the things that the Biden administration is doing for small business. And if you can do that without biting your tongue as it sticks in your cheek, I'll give you extra points. But talk about what could be helping small business.
Well, certainly, look, less regulations and the opportunity to use the free market system to grow our businesses, right? And less taxes. And, if we could, even in the state, if we can get rid of B-poll, the B-poll tax for businesses was a tax that was put on the books to pay for the War of 1812. I think we've paid for that war by now.
Yeah, I just got to
You
think.
buy a computer, you buy a desk, you never really own it because you're always paying taxes on it. It's almost like property tax, but for the business community, it's one of those things that's an irritant. It just causes the cost of goods to rise and everything else that goes into the equation of whatever widget or product you're selling. So, I think the biggest concern as a small business owner for me is taxation. How do we figure out the taxes? How do we put away estimated quarterly taxes? Have we put away enough estimated quarterlies? Do we not put enough? Do we have enough away? What if we get audited? How much do I need to have on hand to cover that shortfall? And what if I forgot some receipts or my accountant didn't do it correctly? It's such a difficult thing to do, and you're not, as a small business owner, you're not going to be able to do that stuff without a CPA to help you do it. And that's really a kind of a travesty for business owners. It doesn't inspire people to go out and start businesses when you've got to work your way through all these mounds of regulatory burdens, whether that be like in my business as an insurance financial person, all the tests I have to take. And my staff who works for me has to take to be licensed. And then now when you work in that, what is the minimum wage? Does that keep going up?
Mhm.
How do you offset and get the right people that are willing to even go out and get their licenses, such in my situation, when they maybe don't even have to have a license to make nearly close to the same salary? And how do you match those benefits?
What Well, and you raise a great point because I think it was just earlier this week, one of the Health and Human Services undersecretaries was testifying before Congress and made the claim that there were 1.9 jobs for every American right now, and that was the struggle with the economy is that we had just gosh darn too many jobs and not enough people there for it. And I wonder, I know that the labor participation rate is around 60 to 65% right now. Bryce, is part of what you're talking about this regulatory capture, where a small business owner is going to have ostensibly twice an employee's salary in revenue just to justify making that higher. Is that one of those things that you're talking about? Is lifting that burden so it doesn't cost so much to employ someone?
Well, and that's right, Joe. I mean, you're right on target. Look, you're our my biggest cost item is salaries and benefits. That's my biggest cost item for my industry. And I would say if you looked across all the industries as a whole, I think employee salaries and benefit packages are those most expensive, depending on what that industry is. If it's raw products and you're trying to buy ore and those sort of things to make steel, I could be totally wrong. Okay.
Hmm.
But in the General Assembly several years ago, when we still had the majorities, we passed
Right.
the Red Tape Reduction Act, and that took a lot of those streamlined regulations that we had and kind of got rid of them, and it opened the opportunity for us to grow in certain sectors of business. Right.
Hmm.
The challenge is how do you open that that orifice to where it catches all business, and that's how do you do the most good for the most amount of people. And I think part of that is through taxation and regulation. And if you can cut both, then you're going to open it up. But if you
Hmm.
cut one without looking at the other, I don't know if you're doing a lot of good. And that's the hard part. I mean, it's hard to run a business and stay profitable today. I was just having a conversation 2 days ago about looking at going out to dinner to a nicer establishment and what the bill was for the same amount that you can go through a fast food joint. And literally, the fast food joint was more expensive than a sit down dinner.
Mm, wow.
What are those cost comparatives and why is that now? I mean, you used to be able to go out and get a $5 hamburger meal. I don't even know where you can get one that's not $8 to $12 now.
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
know.
that's the cause.
Yeah, is that wage driven or is that cost of goods plus wage and all the other stuff they're going in it? I literally went through McDonald's to get coffee this morning on my way out, and I looked at a sign that they were hiring and all the things which I think is great that they are offering tuition assistance, 401k, food, all these like gamut of things to get people in there to really get them working. And I'm wondering, well, that costs money. That's a
Sure.
lot. No wonder why my coffee was $3.50 for a small coffee,
Yep.
right?
It has to be.
It has to be because they have to make a margin. My dad was in the food service business for a long time. He was in multiple different kinds of businesses, gas station, a trucking company. This his last job, he owned a Hart's fried chicken restaurant. And he finally told me, "Son, there's only so much you can charge for a drumstick before people just aren't going to buy it."
This is true.
Right? And
No,
so,
that's what, and all businesses are facing that. So, I think the vice president's premise is that that's where the government is somehow going to tax these mystical people, and then send the money to them in ways of aid, assistance. It's like Munchausen's by government. We're going to cause the problem and then insist we're the only ones who can fix the problem. Meanwhile, she hasn't visited the southern border, which, if I'm not mistaken, was one of her jobs was to handle the southern border, and we've got a huge problem there. Florida. Is just voting on more requirements for e-verify for the employers in their state. Yet you're seeing this coalition of Republicans and Democrats saying no e-verify for businesses, while you've got millions of people who are non-citizens in the country, and many of them committing crimes and things like that. Bryce, and it's still a Virginia problem coming across that border, isn't it?
100%. And here's part of the other challenge. And look, this is just who our workforce is. I mean, if you go out on any construction site today, new home site or anything else, and you actually go to work and you look to see who's doing the majority of that work, uh, they're usually, a lot of them are Latino.
Hmm.
That's just the way it is in my district. And, it's just a different workforce today than it was 10, 15, even 20 years ago. And you look at that influx of people. Look, the border, our, our immigration policy is just absolutely broken, absolutely broken. And it shouldn't be a political issue. It really
Hmm.
shouldn't be. And if people would get away from it making a political issue and really look at the sake of the country as a whole, you could fix the issue. You
Right.
could absolutely fix that issue. But nobody wants to do that because it's such a divisive issue that one party or the next party could actually take and hang over somebody else's head.
Well,
And at the same time, these folks are taking uh, folks that have been born here, Americans or U.S. citizens. They're taking their jobs. Illegals are taking their jobs. Right?
mhm.
That's
Right.
what they claim.
Well, and it's exploitation. I mean, that's the sad part of it is we hear earfuls about slavery from 150 years ago, but this becomes almost a soft core kind of slavery where this shadow population that's living off the grid, if you will, has to work for these lower wages because they have no recourse. They have no access to our judicial system. They have no way to defend themselves because they're really, not supposed to be here, and people exploit that. And I think that that's where I feel like the administration in Washington, and I really only bring it up because they're here in Virginia today, touting their small business successes. But that's where they're suborning a worse kind of slavery than we had even 150 years ago.
Well, I think it's important to understand the fundamental principles of government. Government doesn't create wealth. Businesses create wealth. And when you hear government saying we're going to help businesses create more wealth, I worry about that. I don't need the government in my business. I know how to market. I know how to sell. I know my product. I don't want their help. I want them to get out of the way. And the more we can get government out of the way, we can allow businesses to thrive. I think another part of the border that we're talking about, and it doesn't have anything to do with business and them, is what are they going to do about the fentanyl crisis?
Yeah.
This year I got the bill passed that labels fentanyl as a weapon of terror. It's going to allow our attorney general and prosecutors to go after folks who are knowingly, intentionally spreading this stuff. The amount of deaths is just absolutely horrendous, with over 2,000 deaths last year alone in our Commonwealth due to fentanyl overdoses. I mean, when do we actually shut the border down, right? Or at least shut that part of it down so that stuff's not coming, that poison's not coming in here killing our people.
Well, what about
People would be outraged. But
mhm.
instead, we've got this matriculation of deaths that are happening time and time and time again. And it's like, oh, well, it's just a big number. But if that was a single incident where everybody got killed, 2,000 people at one time, what do you think they'd do?
Well, it's interesting because the numbers of fentanyl deaths, if you connect them correctly, outnumber gun manufacturer related deaths. But the president wants a bill that allows people to sue Remington or Smith and Wesson. Where's the recourse for somebody whose kid gets killed by this fentanyl that comes in a lot of cases from China into Mexico and then up across the American border? Who do we sue then?
Well, I guess you sue the Chinese government and the drug cartels. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you can bring a suit. I don't think you can bring a suit against the government, but this is what I'm talking about. This is the stuff that Congress needs to be taking up. That a bipartisan commission, if that even exists today, up in
Hmm.
Washington, to look at these things. We've been able to do some of that here in the state when we found a bunch of that fraud going on in charitable gaming. We had a lot of things happen out of that, and none of it was partisan, and none of it had anything to do with one party or the other. It was about fixing that problem because
Hmm.
we are now a gaming state. In fact, we'll have a study this summer to try to set up the Virginia Gaming Commission to make sure we do it right, so we don't have fraud, abuse, and that there are regulatory, frameworks in there. You've heard about the lady that got attacked down at Rosie's,
Oh yeah.
and all that, and she's suing
Hmm.
them now because, and there was a deficiency in the JLARC report that showed, hey, they got a lot of things to fix down with Rosie's and historical horse racing, and we're
Yeah.
addressing that. And so, I don't see any reason why big government, federal government, can't get in and like focus on one thing, maybe do it well for once.
Well,
I mean, I know that sounds really tough, but if they really did
yeah.
try to do it, I mean, think of what that would ultimately
Mhm.
do for the American public and America as a whole. If we actually could get in and actually, I'm not even, if we have fixed it, right? If we
Mhm.
have fixed it, where would we be?
Well, and that's one of the things that I think really makes people disquiet is because when you see and I'm going to bring this back to the Virginia Senate as you are running for reelection to that esteemed body and you want to go back and represent now the 28th Senate district and there's a primary coming up on Saturday to that end, Senator Reeves. uh, One of the things that I think a lot of the listeners and viewers of the show are concerned about, worried about, is the idea that they'll vote for a Republican majority, let's just say in the state Senate, and then a lot.
Let's get
I
it.
was right, but there's a lot of legislation that was very exciting, but we knew it wasn't going to go anywhere in the Senate. What about the concerns that they have? Address that with a Republican majority, that a lot of these bills that we saw the last couple of years will actually get out of the Senate rather than have people like with Obamacare in the federal government when finally confronted with a president that would sign it, all of a sudden nobody wanted to do it anymore. Talk about bills that you need to make it through the Virginia Senate so that Governor Youngkin might actually sign them.
Well, certainly the governor has a lot of initiatives. I mean, we're thrilled. In full disclosure, we're happy, thrilled the governor endorsed us. We have his endorsement and his trust. We've carried water for the governor before fixing, getting the large tax cut for our veterans. That helps the Commonwealth as a whole. We have the most women veterans in the country.
Mhm.
We've got almost 800,000 veterans here, 33 military installations. We're working that. But that's made it through. What we tried to do was take the age rate off that. We said 55 and older. Well, that 40 to 55 is a large gap, and I don't think people are going to stay here and wait to get a $40,000 tax break when they can still go to Texas, Tennessee, and Florida and a bunch of
Mhm.
other states and get a greater tax break, right? Well, how do we incentivize our best and brightest to stay here? That would be one I would like to do again. We need to repeal the red flag laws. The laws allow the opportunity for mischievous people to file fake complaints
Mhm.
and people's rights get violated. We need to look at, in my opinion, school choice. We had mandated school choice under COVID. You saw
Right.
parents pulling, right? It got mandated.
Yep. Absolutely.
And and there were parts of that that actually worked. A lot of private schools that were open, their doors were wide open. A lot of students went there, and
Yep.
guess what? They came out ahead of their counterparts that were doing distant learning. It depends on that child. And so, if you look at a lot of those type of bills, I think with a Republican majority, those bills will see it to the governor's desk. But here's the challenge. That's where everything died last year. Is they call it the blue wall in the Senate, and there's a pathway for us to win. I'm excited about that pathway. We're working very hard to get a Republican majority. And here's the other thing it'll do, Joe. And you've been around long enough. You've seen these things happen. We've had 11 retirements in the
Mhm.
Senate alone. 11, which I think speaks to the volatility, I guess, of politics to get today and the veracity of politics today. Some of these older folks that have been in there a while are just like, I'm not putting up with that crap anymore because it's just too much. I mean, nothing's based on facts, and grenades are getting tossed, and
Mhm.
it's just rip the individual down no matter what. Reagan's 11th commandment went out the window with the trash. I mean, it's just tough.
Well,
But with those 11 going, Joe, that leaves that next crop to come up. And so someone like myself, who's number 20 in seniority now, I will be number 9 overall in seniority. So relatively fast moving up the chain of command. That for our area, that gives us an enormous leg up on some of the other districts. And so there is some beneficial measures to
mhm.
that. Also, I would say that a lot of the retirements that happened this year that are going forward are what I would call some of the squishies in the Senate. And if we
Okay.
get the majority, here's what I will tell you. You'll find out who the conservatives are because those bills are going to come forward, and we'll find out if they'll actually vote them through or they won't vote them through because we're going to put people on the board.
Well, and certainly a lot of people have made hay, and a lot of those retirements. Emmett Hanger, for example, Steve Martin, were based on overlapping and all of a sudden being in a district with another Republican and deciding, yeah, I'm not going to get into a primary battle over that. But you talk about these new districts, and I've talked to a lot of people who don't like the fact that they don't know who their senator is or their House representative is instinctively because it's been 10 years. But when they look at it on a map and they compare it to the old districts, they say, well, that actually does look like it makes a lot of sense. So I'm not sure in a couple of years' time we're going to see the angst over the new districts that we have right now. What are you hearing as you campaign around, Bryce?
Well, I think the districts were drawn very, very close and competitive. There are a lot of competitive districts now, a lot more than there were, right?
Hmm.
Because it wasn't drawn by one political party or the other. And so I think these special masters that drew the districts drew them to the best of their ability to make it quasi fair. There are some members who think, gosh, man, I got screwed in the deal or anything else, but it's really not about members. It's about the constituency and what's best for Virginia. And so I think you will. I agree with you, Joe. I think over time you're going to see people settle in. They'll know who their representatives are, and we'll get back to business, the business of governing. But I think we're going to still have, what does the House have? A 2-seat majority, and the Senate
Hmm.
has a 2-seat majority the other way. You're going to have these competitive races going forward for the next 10 years,
Well,
and take more and more and more money.
Well, and not just money, and that actually came up in some of the House and Senate primaries in the Democratic Party in our flagship area, Bryce, where several of the candidates are talking about the state taking over campaign finance and things like that. And I think there's much more nuance to it than just the government picking who gets to be the next challengers for the government. Do you see any future of campaign finance reform in Virginia?
Well, we've already had some, and what I would say is the stuff that we have put on the books doesn't have any teeth.
Hmm.
So we didn't put real teeth into it. So I can file a finance report. It could be wrong, or maybe I don't list all my expenses. My opponent hasn't listed but one, but he's got signs and mailers and all this stuff. So he had to pay for it, but you can't track it because he didn't put it in the column. But there's no repercussions for that. There's no penalty if he didn't. I mean, he can be audited and found a deficiency and then have to do it. So I think we got to go back in and make it fair across the board for everyone, incumbents to challengers to everybody who's part of that process.
Mm.
Um, but really, if you look at Virginia, our transparency side of politics is that it's just transparent. I mean, you
Yeah.
can see every donation that's made.
Hmm.
And so I think that's important as well because, you know, no matter what you do, Joe, I think Jill Vogel probably said it best from the dais one day. Somebody, some smart lawyer somewhere is going to figure out a workaround to whatever you do.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened in Congress, right? They tried to clean it up with uh, uh, I think that, what is that, Feinstein or
Yeah.
Feingold,
Yeah. It's a
whatever,
fine
right?
gold. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fine gold.
And look what it did. It
Hmm.
exploded, made it difficult for people to run for office. And then you still can't figure out who the heck is hitting you till way after the election, if you can even find that out.
Yeah.
And so a lot of good intentions, but poor execution and poor planning. And I think no one's looked at it as a long-term issue. Like, how do we do it properly? And I've talked to other legislators in other states, and every state's a little different.
Hmm.
Uh, but I don't think there's been one state that has it perfect that
Yeah.
I know that people are completely happy with the way finance laws work. But I certainly love the aspect of 100% transparency,
Yeah.
so you can go look it up.
Well, and I see how the costs, mailers and commercials wind up there. Bryce Reeves is on with us, brycereeves.com, running for reelection in the new Virginia Senate 28th District. You mentioned schools and school choice earlier. All the counties around your district and all of them in the Commonwealth are kind of setting their budgets this last couple of weeks. A lot of tax increases have hit a lot of people. whether it be through the rate or just higher assessments there. And a lot of the boards are pointing at Richmond saying, well, it's these guys, they're making unfunded mandates that we have to fill. And now we have to have mental health coordinators and psychiatrists and things like that because they made us close down for 2 years and kids are scared. What does the state need to do to handle the accusation of unfunded mandates, but to make sure that the local people aren't getting killed with their property taxes?
Well, first and foremost, property taxes are governed by your local board of supervisors, city council, those folks, right? And the school board determines how much money the school board budget's going to be. So if there's a tax increase for, let's say, Albemarle schools, because they want to rebuild a bunch of schools and retrofit them and everything else, that's a capital improvement project. Well, they're going to go to the board of supervisors to ask for that appropriation of money. And then that local board or that city council is going to say, we're going to approve what the school board wants and what our education system wants. So we're going to increase your taxes to pay for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't have any control over that at the state level. That's all at the local level. However, if you're starting to look at overall statewide, what our requirements are constitutionally says that all education has to be the same, whether it be in Southwest, Southside, or Fairfax. Those are two distinctly different areas of financial wealth and taxation and everything else. And so that's where you get the disparity, not Republican or Democrat, but the disparity on who gets what and how it's carved up and what's most important for those kids. And so we can't have kids in Southwest and Southside not having the same ability to a great education that the kids that go to Thomas Jefferson High School, I think if it's still being able to call that, I don't even know. Right?
I don't know who's allowed to get into it now, Bryce.
Yeah, exactly. Or
I'm
they
sorry.
get their awards, right? That's a whole nother topic. But
yeah.
but you get what I'm saying. So, I will say there were a lot of unfunded mandates when Democrats had full control of the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. I never would vote for an unfunded mandate because I don't think that's right. While the policy might be a great policy, unless we fund it, it's not right to pass it down and say, you guys figure it out. When we limit the amount of abilities for certain entities, localities, the only way they can raise money, because we're Dillon state, is raise property taxes, right? So I don't think that's right, but it certainly is happening. And Albemarle County is going to have some of the highest taxes in the state now because, you have a very progressive school board and you have a progressive county board of supervisors and there's a lot of wealth there and they want to get it out and they want to put it into public education.
Well, let me pick up on that. I'm not picking on Albemarle schools. I have plenty of time to do that later. Bryce Reeves is on with us, but you brought up their school build and their school capital expenditures, and they just announced that they want to build new schools, and they want to do it on the backs of this idea that they have an equity agenda. And instead of coming with some hard, fast statistics saying, hey, our schools are overcrowded, and then you have an actual survey that says, here's how many kids, here's how many we want in the class. Now they're saying, well, we've determined that they're inequitable. And now it's almost like a free pass to say we need to build new schools because we've determined somehow mystically. Can the state rein some of that in and make through the Board of Education a requirement that school constructions and things like that have to be based on the science of actual population and crowding, not imaginary feel-good, this number that we created is based on a quotient of a feeling that we surveyed 100 students and that kind of made up stuff. Bryce, can we get some sanity coming from the state, or is that the wrong place to look?
No. Well, if you remember, Joe, there were a lot of bills. Almost every agency and every bill now has some form of equity policy built into it, right? And our education system is no different. So that terminology, equity, is different than equality. Those are two different terms.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you use the term equity, it is definitely not the same as equality, nor the same standards. So it's not based on an equal education for all students, and number count of students are based on the equity side, which is based on race, gender, all the other elements of equity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know how you justify a new building for that alone. If you're talking about equality, maybe so, there's some metrics there, but equity is built into our code. It can be reversed. It just takes steel nerves and the willpower and the majority to do some of those things to get us back to where we're spending money wisely. Look,
Mm-hmm.
one of the jobs as an elected official is to be a good fiduciary with our tax monies and make sure that we're putting them where they're needed most, whether that be our district, the 17th right now that I represent, part of Albemarle, and that, or the state as a whole. And I think a lot of us view not just our own areas, but we view the Commonwealth as a whole. Are we being good stewards with taxpayers' money? We have a $3.8 billion surplus right now, looking at going into a recession. Should we just blow that 3.8, or do we need to be a little more cautious, reserve, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can we give some of our taxpayers back their money? And where do we need to put those monies? I personally think there are a lot of other areas where we can help small business and we can help individuals. And, you know, some people say, oh, well, $250 back on my taxes isn't going to do a lot. Well, listen, $250 to a lot of families is paying for all their sports for the year, or it's allowing that kid to go to a summer camp, or quality of
Mm-hmm.
life for $250. That's a lot of money.
Yeah,
And
it's and you could send them gold too for it. I mean, you know, I suggested maybe take the rainy day fund and invest it in gold and see what that turns into. Senator Reeves is on with us. Last one for you. Horrific story out of Farmville. Didn't get any coverage really because, well, I'm not really sure why. I covered it a lot because Farmville's not far from our home base. But a fellow who was accused of shooting a sheriff's deputy 4 times, killing him, was being held in Farmville. And apparently there was a door, several doors, according to a report I read, that if you just kind of jiggled the handle correctly, the door opened and you could leave. And he, along with somebody else earlier in the day, exploited this door that just opened to there. I understand that there are budgets and there are processes, but gosh, I think a door lock is mission critical if you're a jail operator. Is there a problem in the system that our correctional facilities can't get locks fixed on doors to the outside world? And beyond that, is this system symptomatic of a problem where the administration doesn't believe in the system anymore, so they're not really, you know, working very hard to make it work well?
well, let me say this: as somebody who chaired the committee that oversaw Department of Corrections, you have state, you have state prisons, and then you have local jails. All right,
Mhm.
and the state gives monies to each of those. We're facing an issue in Culpeper where we'd like to take a facility, Coffeewood Correctional Facility, that's been mothballed for I don't know how many years, 10, 12 years, that we're still, as a state, paying money to mothball a facility where the locality is willing to take a portion of that and we can section it off so they can make those renovations to their old jail. They're,
Mhm.
put their prisoners in there and those sort of things. So we've got to take a look at that. We've got problems, not just in our jails, our local jails, but in the prison system itself. And there's been a lot of discussion about that lately. I don't think you'll find this administration weak with regard to that. I know our Secretary of Public Safety personally, he was the sheriff in Fauquier County, and Bob Moser's a great Secretary of Public Safety. So he has a focus on that. It's just a matter of how do we turn that focus into safety and security for the citizens of the Commonwealth. I mean, we had a parole board before that would let cop killers go without
Yeah.
even the due process and following the law. So, we're swinging it back, but we can only swing it back so far without winning the Senate majority.
Yeah, and a governor that would give them their voting rights back after they'd been reapprehended as well. Bryce, you know, go figure with that. Senator Bryce Reeves, thank you so much for your time. I know you're
Thank you, Joe.
campaigning. It's a firehouse primary on Saturday. How is the get out the vote work going? Because I know a lot of folks have long drives to participate in this semi-firehouse primary that's going on.
Well, no one has a longer drive than me. I can say that because I got to go to all three of them. But the reality is, we tried to break it down. The committee, if you understand the committee process, every chairman in the new 28th district, they all met. They elected a chairman. And between those chairmen within the party, they chose the nomination method based on their volunteer base, based on the cost of doing it, and the regional, how the district's located. They decided to have 3 voting locations. So they broke it down. Fauquier and Rappahannock vote up in Fauquier and Bealton. Madison, Greene, and Culpeper vote in Culpeper, and then Western Spotsylvania and Orange all vote in Orange. And so it'll be from 10 to 4. There's no absentee ballots. There's no early voting. It's straight up. Come on in. Welcome to, almost like Iraq. You go in, you got to sign the form, you go in, you're a voter, you get to vote. And it's pretty simple. So we're excited about that. That's 10 to 4 on this Saturday. And we think we're doing a bang up job right now, and we hope to close it out.
Meanwhile, early voting begins in a lot of the other primaries on Friday. Will Bryce Reeves work to put the genie back in the bottle? I know that the governor, I meant to ask you this earlier. I'm doing my best, Detective Columbo. Pardon me, there was one more. The governor just announced that his Political Action Committee, Spirit of Virginia, has hired somebody specifically to help races with early voting and absentee balloting. I know most conservatives don't love that idea, but talk about getting the majority and then cutting back on these early votings and the ballot harvesting and everything else, Bryce, before we let you go.
All right. So real quick, I'm going to give you the down and dirty for your listeners. During COVID, Democrats passed a number of bills, and it's a state, and let's say this, it's a national plan that they executed. They just did it in New Mexico. If you don't believe me, go look it up. They'll talk about passing permanent absentee ballots, early voting, all that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. It's a plan. It's like a football plan game. They did that to us under COVID. We didn't realize what was happening when we went to permanent absentee ballots. As Republicans, we typically go out and look for those voters who vote in every election, or at least in some primaries, and every 4 years. We would consider those 3s and 4s, 4 being the best voter, 1 being maybe they come out and vote for a Republican once every 4 years. And, 2 would be a little bit better than that. Well, what the Democrats did was they went after their 1s and 2s. They sent them permanent absentee ballots. You know what the return rate is on an absentee ballot, Joe?
70%?
86%.
Wow.
You know why we're getting whooped and the election's over before Election Day? They pushed their absentee ballots. They got their people that are 1s and 2s to make it so easy for them to vote. It's brilliant, right?
Yeah.
So the 1s and 2s are voting. They're sending in their permanent absentee, 86%. They can count those votes. They also made it legal. So I can send Joe Thomas an absentee ballot and call Joe and say, Joe, have you filled it out yet? Have you filled it out? Yeah. You haven't filled it out. Okay, you filled it out now. I'm going to pick it up.
Right,
come
right.
Pick it up. You don't have to mail it, Joe. Don't spend the 55 cents or 60 cents or whatever. I'll come pick it up for you. Yep. And then when I'm done, I'm just going to drop it in a Dropbox. Closest thing I can. Yep. I didn't make the rules of the laws. But if we're going to continue to win, we have to play by those laws and those rules.
But will you change them once the majority is back in Sanity's place? Did we lose Bryce? Did we go over? I think we went over with Bryce. Anyway, and that's the question. And I know that we've talked to lots of folks who have said that. Apologies to Bryce where he is. I haven't upgraded my Zoom membership to include 45-minute meetings yet. We're still doing this on a budget. Our friends at Gov Oversight have helped us put it all together, but if you watch the little scroll here, you will see a little thing right there. There it is, your ad here. Please support what we do. And I'll tell you what, let me do this really quickly here. I think we can... we lost a chance to get him. Bryce was going to call in and answer, but I had to pull 6 or 7 plugs out to get that to happen there. So we will wrap up festivities with that. Remember what I said about the May the 4th. You're disquieted by it because you really know somewhere out there's a U.S. Jar Jar, and he may be a Republican. May the 4th be with you. Sleep on that. Thank you. And for all of us here, so long, and thanks for all the fish.